Hello, everyone. My name is Julia. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the content specialist here at Sage. And today we're interviewing Ken Pinkela, and we're so excited to learn from Ken and hear about his story. So, Ken, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and take it away.
Hi, thank you so much. It's been great to be invited to do this. My name is Ken Pinkela. I do he, him. Um, I am a proud New Yorker, was in the Army for 29 years, and as we're going to get into this story, had a pretty bad experience on the way out the door.
Yes. So, we can backtrack a little bit and start from the beginning. So, if you're comfortable sharing, could you tell me a little bit about growing up and kind of coming into your identity and your sexuality?
Sure. I have always it's not the first time I've been asked that, whether over my life or as I talk about the story. I had a great childhood. I had a great childhood. I had a great high school experience. The coming out and sexuality thing was, as we jokingly call late bloomer. Um, Big extended family here in upstate New York, great friends, all the involvements. It's always fun when people find out that I was king of my prom. So it was actually very cool. Great neighbors, great area to grow up in up here in Orange County. It really wasn't until I went to military school when, the kind of the, as you're getting older, I went to a military school relatively young out of high school, wanting to do the whole military path. When I was at what was known as the old ROTC basic camp, and it was one of the first years they ever did them. It was at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And as some of the older veterans or older folks sort of remember, it was not just this is before Don't Ask, Don't Tell time. This was when it was illegal to be gay and join the military. And like I was saying, it was kind of like a late blooming thing for me. I had never even identified or even thought about it. You look back now at this age going, yeah, I might have seen something or somebody, and there was still both, attractions. Um, but I can remember literally being asked if I was gay at Fort Knox, and it was the old setup. They used to set you up at these individual interviews um, towards the end of the camp, the basic training piece. And it really was. It was I mean, and they'd lie to you, hey, we've had other people come up to us and say that, they thought you were gay. Are you gay? And it would have disqualified you, literally kicked you out. And I can remember that kind of first question going into a quote profession or a career really was like, well, did I do something? Did I say something? Did I walk the different way? Did I, what was it? Why'd they ask? And then you found out later on, they freaking asked everybody because it was still this, they weren't going to let the, and I say this as a New Yorker, they weren't going to let the faggots in the military. And unbeknownst to them, there were a lot of us in the military. But my whole coming out was really a pretty neat experience with a best friend in Germany. My first duty assignment, brand new second lieutenant. At the time, I'd just gotten promoted for a first lieutenant, just by time. And it was kind of just all went from there. It was, alcohol involved in the discussion of, something about attractions and watching something on late night German TV, which of course was risque back then. It's normal. Late night German TV had a lot of nudity and stuff, and it was just a very cute, fun way. Um, at least I look back at it to think of how fortunate I was that it was with a best friend. Um, and then, as I say, it was all downhill from there, and really kind of did I would say, the process of, accepting myself, telling my family. I did not say anything, obviously, because I had an entire career in the military. And it wasn't until towards the end of the last decade of my career with the Don't Ask, Don't Tell piece, being undone by President Obama, that for the time that I was in uniform, I never had the enjoyment of being open and out like everybody else was in their family lives at work. You kept a very separate, very, very separate life, especially on the officer side of the house. because people in uniform are extremely nosy. We're a small community. You would think there's so many of us, but there really aren't. And boy, we want to know everything about everybody. Monday mornings after long holidays or any long holiday, people would come in and brag about what they did, with their families. And of course, for the men, it was their hookups and, where they met stuff. And most of us will tell you that was probably this first time in our lives we had to learn to live the lie, and that it was okay to lie because it was a protection mechanism, and process. And we would, misgender everything. We're very good at that. She's were he's and he's were she's, and uh, it was just very, very, very different. So I do miss the opportunity that if I wish I was still in that, how cool it could have been to have had a kind of quote normal, um, life and career. But other than that, my coming out, I would have still said that I was very privileged, very lucky. Again, best friend overseas, kind of coming out, great experiences, nothing bad except my career, But I really didn't even have a lot of run-ins while I was in the military. We separated ourselves, so very small, tribal. The gays, we would find each other, and we were our own. We didn't even know that we were becoming our own support groups. We were just a group of friends. And now at an older age, I look back and it's like it was almost a normal. We were looking for support groups. We were looking for companions. We were looking for friends. It wasn't anything other than that. And that network of friends, became sometimes our families as we were, deployed or away from home at assignments. So yeah, my coming out wasn't really much. It was, of course, later on in my career that I had some issues.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I appreciate you sharing, especially sharing about the community aspect that you
Yeah.
had.
Yeah.
Um, if you are ready and comfortable, would you kind of like to walk us through what happened with your career that went poorly and what happened in June of 2012?
Sure. So the big high points, because of course there are details, but there are not a lot of details. A friend of mine who was a Marine Corps officer, stationed in San Diego, and these are relevant pieces to show again how tight but how dispersed the gay community, especially in the military, was, and still is. He had met a friend, a young lieutenant from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Mind you, Pinkela is living up and stationed in DC at the Pentagon. These two are in North Carolina and in San Diego, the other side of the country. Unbeknownst to me at the time, we can use first names. Adam was dating Chris. I didn't know that, and it was fine. It wasn't anything, because the whole background for me being introduced was I was a good mentor and again friend, network of another gay officer, that Adam, when we first met years prior to that, um, that he wanted Chris to meet me, and he was having a very difficult time with a young company commander in his battalion and his brigade, giving him a hard time. Didn't understand it at that time. The lieutenant in Fort Bragg, had not come out to his family members. It's a scary time to think, what if something happens to me and I, die, and my family doesn't know who I am, all of that. And that was the introduction. They actually came up to my home, and I was just building my home in Arlington, Virginia. Um, we went for breakfast, just normal chit chats about everything, about what the hell, what's wrong, what's going on, who are you? And then literally after that, it became a telephone conversation. Again, it's North Carolina and Washington, D.C., Fort Bragg, and two military lives. This person was not introduced to me as a relationship or a sexual anything. And it really bothers me as we get into this about the way that they accused gay men and women, and specifically me, that that's all we do. It was all about sex, 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 sex. God forbid that we actually have normal lives and friends. So very sadly, this person was not the person I was really kind of introduced to. Really spun out of control. There was some alcohol involved, a few phone calls. everything. And again, there's a record of trial. So as I speak of these things, it's 13 years ago. And I should kind of interject now that there is an ongoing case with the Department of the Army, with the Secretary of the Army. So it's not over because of things that have come to light uh, about 3 or 4 years after my trial, and even as recently as last year. But there were some phone calls. We never corresponded over anything other than my phone or my official Pentagon email. So if you're trying to hide something, why wasn't I using a different email? Why wasn't I using something to try to be nefarious? Blah blah blah. Um, he was drunk and made some very bad comments about President Obama, actually dropping the N-word. I can remember cutting him off, talking to Adam about him being, drunk and drinking problems. Did talk to him for like a month and a half, 2 months. And before the Christmas holidays of Jesus, 2008, 2009 is when 2008 when we first met. And again, some of it because it has been 13 years. He had called and said he had nowhere to go for Christmas and New Year's, and asked if he could come to my home for New Year's Eve, the New Year's holiday. His father had just retired as a colonel in the army and was moving to Germany. His mother was a nurse and flying support missions. I believe it was for Afghanistan or Iraq, can't remember, but he had nowhere to go, quote unquote. My whole family was in my home, and we actually talked about it and told them his little bit of background. And as a kind of a military family, my sister was married to an officer. Those kids, they were stationed all over. Obviously, I was, grandparents, and folks in the communities. They hear this, it was okay. It was kind of a safe space. You don't leave anybody behind. You don't leave anybody out. He'd called and asked for permission. I wasn't alone. Not a problem. And he shows up to my home with my family in my home. We had let him in. I mean, this is some things that really are, sometimes when I get talking about it, I get in the weeds. They even had my mother testify to the details of him coming in and things being left downstairs on the couch for him to sleep. And then I joke about there was a great alarm system in the house, and it was two Weimaraners and a poodle. And there was nobody or nothing going up those freaking stairs in my house without one of those three freaking out, and barking. So, and we said that flippantly, but we also said it to kind of connect with people about if they knew anything about having three dogs in the house, two Weimaraners and a poodle, that a stranger walks in and can kind of come upstairs and do what the allegations were laid against me. But in a nutshell, there was accusations that, oh, by the way, we didn't have sex, and even in the trial, this person could not even say if we had sex. But yet, I was accused and convicted of allegedly exposing someone to HIV. And I don't know how you expose somebody to HIV without some kind of a bodily fluid exposure and a direct exposure into either their body or some kind of wound, bleeding wound. And herein lies the rest of the story about the whole HIV stigma and the misinformation and literally the hate and discrimination about they don't care that science knows and how modes of transmission. We didn't know those in the early days. We know them, of course, to an nth degree now. The advent of medication and the birth of the U equals U movement, in information. It's not just a movement globally, but it's an information piece about being undetectable and being untransmittable, which is now a scientific fact, even though we still have people in the community that want to go, well, maybe. No, it's a scientific fact now. The Army didn't care about any of that. It was about an allegation of allegedly exposing a person to HIV, not infecting them. I was never convicted or accused of infecting another human being. I was accused and convicted of not telling them and somehow exposing them. And we still to this day have no idea what that means of exposure was. And then there was some other BS crap that was made up about in our community would understand douche hose, really nasty things. They didn't even come in and investigate my home. I gave them pictures of my home. And then the big one was they dug up a individual that I was kind of on dating, but playing with years prior. No, by the way, when I was HIV negative. And this individual has come forward and actually signed and did a sworn statement with the attorneys as a Title X recanting statement to the degree that this person has actually by name accused the Army prosecutor, a young captain, of subjoining perjury. He gave us the examples of the dates he was told to say in his testimony. He was told what to say in the questioning and testimony. Um, and as we were, of course, telling people then, and even now, sometimes you get the, you must have done something. It really was a fabricated bullshit, hate driven, discrimination driven um, case that took my career and my life as I knew it back then, away from me. And that's kind of it. I did do 272 days that when they convicted me and found me guilty. There was no jury. It was a judge alone, which I look back to now as turned out to be a okay decision. I chose not to have a jury because they had nothing. And I had even volunteered, as the story will unfold. I volunteered for them to take my blood and do the phylogenetic analysis. Anybody hearing this, they may know of when and why we do phylogenetics as a person living with HIV. The phylogenetics can kind of inform, not kind of, it does inform your caregiver and it informs the medical community of any potential issues with first treatment, your first choice of medications for HIV, any sensitivities or conflicts that you may have. But what it also does, and it's been done a few times over the years, is that phylogenetics is a genetic tree. We know how HIV mutates. And one of the things about HIV is that it mutates so freaking fast. That's why they're very difficult to get in front of the whole idea of a vaccine and then a treatment, because the damn thing, of course, just wants to survive, but it mutates very, very quickly. And it's RNA based. So whole nother discussion we could have. But I volunteered for that. It was something that was standard. It was standard treatment. It's still standard care practice. When someone is first diagnosed with HIV, they'll do a phylogenetic analysis to find out what are your options to start on which meds. But we also knew that they had been used, and I actually went to one of the Navy captains, a physician, a doctor, who was kind of the point of contact for that stuff. And he's like, yeah, no, it won't say exactly what, but it will quote, it will say that you're not the source. And that was okay, I'm going to be a good guy. I'm going to salute the flag and do everything I can. This is bullshit, excuse me. But there was a way for me to go, this isn't me. This is crazy. Where's the investigation of this? Here, I'll help. Take my blood. At first, the attorneys were like, are you crazy? I was very angry at moments, and I volunteered for a polygraph, and they're like, oh, well, you can't do that, sir. You never do that. And I was like, well, I'm going to do that because I have nothing to hide. They didn't want one. But when I offered the blood analysis, so DNA type ish, legal questions came up around it. And when they found out that it would define me as, quote, not the source, that would knock it down. And the prosecution and the Army denied it. But we've been able to preserve that throughout to currently. And I still take it today. Take my blood today. We've got some great friends who have access to some of the best minds in the phylogenetics and epidemiology side of the house that even today they could, because in the military, they got our first blood draws that they use for diagnosis purposes. And those blood draws are maintained indefinitely as part of the history study that the military does. So they have access to our two earliest blood draws, which would be our two earliest, virus before mutation down the road, like today, but it could still be done. Um, but sadly, they convicted me, and I went to Fort Leavenworth for 272 days. All of my case is ass backwards. Um, very sadly, they actually convicted me. The judge says guilty on my birthday. So on my 45th birthday, I was convicted and lost everything. And in this really just twist in the military court system, it's supposed to go to automatic sentencing that day. You would just go from the end of trial to sentencing and then go off to jail. He turns around and looks at the courtroom and says, why don't you go home tonight and come back tomorrow? Now, this guy has just convicted me of, at the time, aggravated assault. You're this bad, evil person, aggravated assault. You're HIV positive and you expose this other soldier to HIV, blah, blah, blah. Why don't you go home tonight and come back tomorrow? I will, I will never, and I hope we can capture it in the movie. That moment in the courtroom, I can see the prosecution looking over at us, the defense table, and the stenographer. She looks up and just this look on her face, like, what the hell did he just say? I mean, there was this moment in the courtroom when he did that. Um, so whatever, I got to go home that night. Sure the hell didn't celebrate. Very terrible things. My mom took it the hardest. My cousin was there. My stepfather, who just recently passed, was there. My sister had left to go home. My friends, my neighbors. And when we got home, my mom, kind of teary eyed and still in shock. The very first thing and the only thing she could think of is that she wanted to make sure that my uncle's 45 pistol that I used to get promoted to lieutenant colonel, um, she wanted to make sure that that was put somewhere, that it was taken away. And I just still to this day can't imagine. And it bothers me to think that it was just her trauma. Um, the first thing she thought of, you know, we came home that night, I had been convicted and she thought I was going to harm myself. Um, but we met the next morning and, sadly, the sentence they had asked for, I think either 16 or 18 years. And he turns around, the judge, and says 1 year, which is very, if there's any lawyers or anybody that watches, 365 in the federal sentencing guidelines still qualifies you for automatic good conduct time. So time was already taken off automatically. He could have done 366 days and I would have lost all that. He could have gone with 16 and 18 years. But he says 365. He doesn't demote me. Yes, very sadly, he recommended dismissal for officers. You are dismissed. And the only best way to describe that is you're erased. And I'm not exaggerating. It's keystroke, you're erased. It's as if you never existed in the military. And of course, we'll talk about that in the next few minutes here about the impacts that the conviction, both to my veterans benefits, my life, and everything really took. But off I went to Leavenworth for 272 days. And they didn't know what to do with me there. I've had talks with old bosses about how broken that system is of children watching children. They're young soldiers because it's our soldiers, military police, MP, their corrections specialty, just watching other soldiers. And the whole long story about my experience at Leavenworth. But 272 days because of the good time. I was the English teacher, still trying to take care of kids, and it was a good distraction for me. It took more time off, and then ultimately came home in March of 2012. And that's kind of the gist of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Ken. I'm sure that's very difficult to relive and really get into the nitty-gritty. So I appreciate that greatly. And yeah, if we could go a little bit more into how you're still fighting today. I know this has really impacted your life, and we can, of course, go into that as well. But I also want to give you a chance to show how hard you fought and how much you've um, reclaimed your life in a sense. And I want to give you the chance to speak about that.
No, I appreciate that. And I tell you, I don't know if you want to, we'll just say this. I want to make thank you for, for recognizing that story, but I also recognize you're hearing that story from me. You may have read some other things, but sometimes it impact on you. So thank you for listening, and I hope you kind of digest it. Because it's crazy. So I just want to say, make sure are you okay? And this is a lot. And
Yeah, no, thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, and people that watch this, it's pretty impactful. Um, so since I came home, and there's no other way to say it's a good New Yorker and Sage is a good New York thing, I was pissed off. I'm still pissed off to this day. Rightfully so. The anger has come down, and I temper it. There was issues from from PTSD combat stuff to I've actually told my shrink every now and then at the VA that some days I feel the PTSD from going to prison and all of this is worse. And it's just moment stuff. But Jesus, I think it was 13 is like really weird. It's an odd number. Let's just say 13. It was 13. It was like 2 weeks after I came home. I'm pissed off, and I find out that for the first time in a few years, Pacha, the President's Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS, is meeting all in one spot downtown DC. So I put my freaking uniform on and I went. And I had talked to a great lady, Kay, and I think Kay is still running the board for the Secretary of Health and Human Services, um, and asked if I could make comments. And nobody knew jack shit about Ken Pinkela. I'm walking in here. So here's this group, and I'm walking in to have my uniform on because at the time I'm still in the Army. I'm on appellate leave. So I still have an ID card. I'm not getting paid. It's crap, but yet I'm still under UCMJ, the law, Uniform Code of Military Justice. So I walk into this thing, and they told me how long I had to speak, and I laid into everybody there and did the direct call to them to ask President Obama, to sign and work out the executive order to stop this. This should never happen again. Of course, I was trying to get some highlights to my case and my cause. But then when I found out even more of the other military kids and soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, everybody that had been affected by this over the years, and then to dig into it and find out that the Congress, because that's my legislator body, the US Congress has never included HIV in the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So there isn't a specific HIV law as we find and have sadly grown in the other states in the country, and then sadly around the world globally, because it became a very conservative, false narrative, false, you know, way to make people feel safe, that they were going to, lock them up. We're going to lock these HIV predators up. You were living with HIV. One of the things, the sex work industry has been hit very, very difficult. Not only do they get attacked for their jobs, and I believe in sex work is work, but you could possibly have an arrest, the solicitation arrest. They find out the person is living with HIV, and they're automatically escalated, and additional charges are laid on these people, men and women, or just wrongfully. And it's all about just HIV. It's the fear. So I'd come home, I make this speech at Pacha, um, in DC, because I come home to my home in Arlington before I lost it, because I had no pay, and had a mortgage, and of course couldn't do anything. Um, and that was kind of the start. I'd met a few people, met some executive directors for some of the local and some of the national HIV organizations, and I was kind of just finding out that the whole HIV is not a crime piece for my T-shirt, and the call out to the people who do the great work. They were very few and far between. And oh, by the way, there was this military aspect that they didn't know about, or they knew just very cursory stuff that we thought it happened there too. Because in the military side, they just kind of shuffle them out and they go away. You never knew about it because there's no reporting about it. Um, so I went after talking to the family. When I did that, I made sure that, hey, I'm going to go out full blast and put my face and name on it. Are you okay with that? And I did. And that led to quite a few things. I worked with some great folks, Sean Strube and Robert Suttle from the Cero Project, um, who really kind of started the HIV is not a crime piece with another organization that's still in New York, CHLP, the Center for HIV Law and Policy. And it was very lucky then to make friends with the gentleman who really started the global recognition and movement around this thing called HIV criminalization, Edwin Bernard, who does the HIV criminal justice or the HIV justice um, organization out of the UK, and just kind of threw myself into it. I filled this void. Our brothers and sisters, the Black and Brown community, getting attacked. The HIV piece was, of course, another layer of attack. And then there was this white guy out of the Pentagon. And it was, as I've quoted to people about, HIV doesn't give a shit about the color of your skin, about your economics, about your education, about anything. However, once HIV gets into a human, we find ways of othering each other. And sadly, discrimination in all of its forms, gets exacerbated and comes to life. We give it life. And I've been very focused around the HIV piece. Criminalization is just one other aspect of the HIV stigma and discrimination. Of course, it hit me very personally that, I lost a career, I lost everything. I still to this day cannot get a job, regardless of what President Obama had tried to do during his presidency, of not having to require you to disclose a conviction up front in a job application. Later on, you would. I can't even get through the door. Probably mostly from being as visible and as vocal as I was. Google my name and oh my God, if you've ever done it for yourself, I can remember the first time I did it for myself after getting into this and opening my mouth. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on the old interwebs there. And if you do any decent mid-level, high-level job application, nowadays it's normal. They're just going to do a Google search on your name. Um, and that's fine. It sucks. It's hurt. Um, it's really not only till recently that I've gotten at least a little help with finally being able to get some of my VA benefits back, but we'll get into that. I've been able to, since all of that, the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation has really stood up and put the power of Elizabeth's name and legacy in her warrior advocacy for HIV. And they've brought in HIV is not a crime as part of one of their main focuses, and just an incredible amount of compassion and directness. And oh, by the way, honestly, it's the access that, even though Liz has passed, the kids and the family and the foundation just absolutely drive on with her legacy and her her fight. And they were able to allow us to create what's called a Council of Justice Leaders. Robert Suttle, I mentioned him earlier from the Cero Project. He'd come over, he works for the foundation and organizes and runs a group of us that have been criminalized and survived to, some degree. Most of the times I'll tell you it's just that we're alive. We got out of jail, and we're trying to rebuild our lives. And that most of us, all of us, at least part of the group, have committed portions, if not all of our lives, to talking about it, and the willingness to put a face to a name in the story, even a lot of times to negative benefits. I may have a Facebook account. I haven't logged on in a very long time. In the early days, the amount of hate mail and death threats that I got was just stupid. I'm just ridiculous. I would have never thought, you think you hear about it until it happens to you. You don't understand the impact. And I have pretty thick skin. But, you know, all of this still hasn't deterred me from doing it. Just parts of it. Luckily, we have our own little support group and talk about it. But I just, really still fighting not only with my own ongoing case, but if I had a chance to talk to Christine Wormuth, as the current Secretary of the Army, that this is not just about me and getting my benefits and my retirement and my life back, former life, but it is, if I have to bring the Army some pain to make them better, I want to. When I say this, people sometimes just either don't understand or cringe, but I still love the Army. It was a wonderful career. It was a wonderful choice. It did incredible things for me, and I made the most of it. Yet at the end, it was still not infallible, and there were individuals who were allowed to do this to me. Again, there was no Army policy. If anything, the Army has, we're one of the only, when I want to say, oh no, I say disease, but it is a disease. There's only one disease that has its own personnel management regulations and policies, and those are service members living with HIV, about how we can stay in and serve and have great careers. Um, there are pieces of that. You can't get recruited or you can't join the Army already living with HIV. But if you should become diagnosed with HIV while you're already in, you can stay and do normal things and have a normal career. And I got promoted twice. And, there were some early days about you couldn't deploy to some areas because some other countries had even worse discrimination policies about HIV. So it limited you, but you were still okay. Um, it's really been, it affected me to find ways to keep my sanity, and it affected me in a lot of very therapeutic ways. I told you when we talked about this, there are some great therapeutic pieces of me being able to talk about the story and talk about this. It get it off your chest kind of deals. I will tell you, every single time I do it, and I'm just kind of having that moment now, something else comes up. They're the basic pieces of the story, but something will make my brain, and I'll have a memory, and it may bother me later on, but there's a wonderful therapeutic piece of that. So, um, continuing the fight has been, really difficult. Some very dark moments. There's been some suicide ideations in the past. I'm upfront about that. I had no idea the effects of real depression, and what it could do to you. I had a wonderful life. I was ignorant to the facts of depression, and what it could do to someone. You would think, where did that come from? Why me? That's not me. The brain and all of that. And these are great discussions I've had both with my therapist and I call it my shrink, my psychiatrist. But we're still there. We're still going to the fight. As I alluded to earlier, the prosecution witness that came forward in the Title 10 recanting statement, has now, talked about very, very specific things by name, the prosecutor subjoining perjury. We've made an application to the Army Board of Corrections, which at the secretary level, each service secretary, subsecretary, Army, Navy, Air Force, they all have these boards that can handle these very hard, very bad situations and allow it to be heard even after a court martial, after a trial, because again, UCMJ is separate and we do have an appellate court system, but there's still this overwatch that the service secretaries can have when my case, post-trial information, the appellate system says it's too late, but it's pretty damn important for someone to hear that the prosecution witness has come forward and is recanting, literally giving a description that they fabricated the story and the allegations against me. You would hope there was a way that the justice system would allow that to happen, and this is that first step. And also the federal district courts. So as a good, proud New Yorker, I have access to SDNY, the Southern District in New York. Known around the world, a very ruthless, very strong court, but also extremely well suited. They handle these marginalized, rough issues. So this isn't just about an individual. You're talking about big policy issue that service members, citizens are being prosecuted without a law in place, um, without evidence, without investigation. It really is going to be, I hope, for myself in the Army and for, service members across the board, not just the Army. Um, you know, enough is enough. Enough of the friggin' discrimination. Enough with the ignorance about HIV. Those three letters still cause people's skin to crawl. And it was all messaging, similar to COVID, if you think about it, in a way. The bad messaging right up front. We couldn't even call it HIV. It was GERD, and we are going to blame somebody. The gays did it. Similar to, sadly, the last administration, it was just China virus. Instead of looking at it as a public health issue, those groups wanted to, in their own ignorance and hate, they created a fear narrative. And for HIV, it's 40 years later, and that fear narrative is still doing very, very serious harm. We may not die of the virus the way we did in the early days, but in many ways, the stigma is worse than death. It seems like death by 1,000 cuts. Sometimes you just can't get past it, and then some of us choose to own it. And I mean, I'm owning it. I know many other folks that have come before me, and some great advocates that I look up to, even still today. Owning their truth, owning their story, owning their life, and that we're fine and we're normal and everything's fine. I just happen to live with a virus, and how lucky we are with the advance of medications that I have a normal, healthy lifespan. Very, very lucky, very fortunate. How's that?
Wonderful. Thank you, Ken. And, speaking of that stigma and the pain that still surrounds being diagnosed with HIV, as someone who's very um, owning it and embracing it and who has really fought for people, and we thank someone like you for paving the way of sorts, what would you say to someone who just got diagnosed with HIV and is really struggling with hearing that or struggling with stigma around it?
The first thing is very easy. You're going to be okay. Um, the overarching death cloud is gone. Generally, it really, really is. It's access to care and access to meds. So, a first thing I'd say, you're going to be okay. And then what I would love to see, and still trying to do, is when someone just finds out that even in the world of PrEP now, that diagnoses are going down, exposures are going down, there are still people that get infected with HIV. In the old days, and I, as a New Yorker in the city, and my cousin very sadly died very early in the outbreak. One of the first things that was done is you got hooked up with somebody else living with the virus. Even then, there was this network of care, and the trans community, even the lesbian community. If we know our history about here in New York, that they put these systems in this network of just embracing somebody, even in the early days when we didn't know how it was exposed or the means of exposure. It was still, you were seen as a human being. So, you're okay. Here, let me introduce you to somebody. And now we have groups like SAGE and GMHC and these incredible medical groups that grew out of and still exist because of HIV. And hook them up with someone that's living and thriving and surviving. And we have people. I think about Mark King and Sean Strube and Peter Staley, and just how blessed I am to say that those are friends. And they've been living with HIV for 30, 35 plus years, living. When they were told they're going to die, they're like, screw you, I'm still here. For whatever reason, medically, biologically, and then their will to live. Of course, well before meds came around, but they're still here. And those kinds of groups and activities in every state, and most of the counties, most, not all, but most of the counties across the country, there's a health department and there's an HIV related organization or point of contact, and just get them into access of care. As we know now, the earlier we start on meds, the better you are, the longer and less side effects. You're okay, and here, let me introduce you to so and so. Literally, that hand walk of getting somebody into care. Um, that's those are the first things that always come to mind when someone like that just asked me a question. What would you say to somebody? The first, you're okay, and here, let me get you over to my doc, or let's see, can you get into this clinic? Do you how do you have access to care? And then from there, there's some great support groups. I mean, hell, we have a little support group here in upstate. And it's me and Peter Staley and a few friends. I think there's only 4 or 5 of us, but still to this day, once a month we get together, and it's just our little HIV support group, even to this day. Um, that's what I would do.
I love that. That's really beautiful, and I really love the emphasis on living and thriving. That it's there's so many people out there that are living and are thriving, and you're not alone. Um, and I wonder, as holidays come up, such as Memorial Day and later in the year, Veterans Day and beyond, I know you still have this love for the military. So, how would you say that people can support people like you know, who are still going through an ongoing case and going through struggles and a complicated relationship? How do we support um, veterans in the LGBTQ plus community?
Um, well, and this isn't just because you guys are doing this interview. I didn't even know about Sage. And it was friends when I first came home that I found out and knew about Sage. So there are organizations across the country. We're just lucky that as New Yorkers, we have kind of the early model that is still thriving and surviving, taking care of the LGBTQ community, specifically, elders and veterans, and how beautiful that is. So if anybody was out there, wanting a way, the first thing I can think of is ask questions. Most of us, if you ask us genuine, compassionate questions, because you can tell the difference between bullshit. You really can. You can tell when someone's asking you just because they're trying to defunkify their own biases, or you're asking a question just wanting to understand us, understand it's another, disease, understand where we're at. Some people don't know that you can, be pregnant and have healthy HIV negative children, that we live forever, that access to meds, and I take more pills for my asthma and arthritis than I do for HIV. And, I may put a smile on my face because that's always one of the fun things I will tell some kids that when I do some talks at like NYU and Fordham and places that I have friends that teach that bring me in. That generation just they don't know. HIV is not a thing because they're not dying, but there's still the fear, and it's the fear that comes from the ignorance about it. So ask questions. With the advent of the internet, and of course everybody has a phone, so you've got basically a little mini computer in your hand. Do some Google search, uh, inform yourself, ask questions of, on a Google search, and I use Google, but an internet search, about HIV, and, can you live? And oh, by the way, I love when I tell people going, has anybody ever been cured of HIV? And when you find out, that we currently have 5, and how lucky I was that Timothy Brown was, a very, very dear friend, and Timmy was the first, and Timmy sadly passed away just what is it, 2 years ago now. And to find out that people have actually been cured of HIV. I don't care if it's just one, but it's there, and the excitement that science and medicine could possibly do it again. And things like that I love. I call it tickling the brain. If people would just ask and learn and then talk about it, I tell people, like I'll tell you, you have the best thing you could do is tell my story. um, you have full rights and permission to talk about, holy, I just saw this guy's interview, somebody in the military, and he's HIV and he went to jail, and you just sit there and have a conversation. Sometimes I miss an old, I say bar, but just an old gathering space. We've disconnected with the phones. Um, but to just sit down, even in your own little group of friends, going, And I've had kids come back to me, and these are kids, students, and they did that, and they couldn't believe the conversations that developed out of that. That's what you can do to support everybody. And I find that really with any issue, specifically you're asking me about HIV and criminalization and LGBT and veteran support, just have the talk. Have the courage to talk, or be curious. And it's okay to be curious, but don't come in with a bias. Just be curious. Maybe you're going to learn something. That's still, to me, the best way you can support, because from that curiosity will be some kind of education that will then spur, more than likely, an involvement. That involvement can be as cursory as a donation to an organization. It could be a volunteering at an organization. It could be something, but ask the question, learn a little something, and then follow your heart and mind, whether it's physically being involved or just sharing the story, is a level of involvement that populates and permeates the ignorance and biases that the old Clairol commercial. And I'm old enough, and hopefully some of the people are old enough to remember the old Clairol commercial. It was the picture of the women with the Clairol shampoo, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends. It works. It works.
Yeah, I know we both spoke about the power of storytelling, especially when
Mm,
you can tell your story authentically. And I know I've already learned so much from you, so I'm so excited to have other people be able to learn from you as well.
mm.
Um, and yeah, those were all the questions I had for you. I wanted to open the floor. If there's anything else that you want to share that you want people to know about you, go ahead and take it away.
Um, there's other things. I had a wonderful, and when I say this, I had a wonderful life. And I hope that with the support of not just organizations like this with Sage and Elizabeth Taylor's AIDS Foundation, but my own family and friends, that I'm going to have another round two of a wonderful life. Um, it is not easy. It has not been easy, but because of some great support from family and friends, um, it's not the HIV that was going to take me. It was my own demons that were going to take me away. Um, that there's a saying going around: you never, when you see somebody, you never know what they're going through at that moment. Um, Walk in my shoes, all of those euphemisms that we've come up with, to take a moment and to understand that most of us that have been really, really traumatized will put a smile on and you won't know there's anything wrong. I would just wish in this venue of the people that are probably going to see this, um, open your mind, ask the questions, be sensitive, but be curious. Be curious. It's okay to ask questions and learn. That's really, I just want to reiterate that. It's a big deal with me. Thank you.